Okay, so we have officially gotten to my favorite part of this video series, which is basically how our monetary system works. And this stuff is straight up crazy. It's awesome. Awesome in a I can't believe this is the way it works kind of way, not awesome like the Grand Tetons are awesome. Maybe if you're a criminal mastermind, it is that kind of awesome. But this system that we have set up, our monetary system, is literally robbing you and I blind of the value in our currency. So without any further ado at all, I want to get right into this stuff. I think you'll enjoy it. And this stuff is real. So I hope you get a lot out of it. Let's talk a little bit about the printing of currency and why the process is basically robbing you and I blind, right? Not you are blind, that doesn't make any sense, but why it's robbing you and I blind. So every government creates currency in basically the same way. The US makes a great case study for it, so we're going to use that as an example. I do have a warning though, because this shit is crazy. And there is actual magic involved. And the more I go over this, like I get halfway through it, I'm like, man, it's already bad. And it just gets worse and worse and worse as you sort of look at how this whole system is put together. So this is cool, cool in a very uncool way. It's cool because whoever came up with this system is seriously a fucking criminal genius. And I applaud them for being able to, come out in the public and say, this is what we're doing. And everyone go, oh, that's such a great idea. I don't know what they're doing, but man, I kind of wish I had that power. So this is the way it works. Politicians get voted in because they promise to give the people free stuff, right? I promise you free stuff. Then the government needs to pay for all the free stuff. So the US Treasury, that's what this little building is. And you'll see, I'm going to keep these icons the same all the way through. The US Treasury writes a check, an IOU, in the form of a treasury bond. And we'll get into what they do with that. But basically, the bond is a promise for future generations to pay for the prosperity that we enjoy today, right? For all the free stuff. It's that whole backed by the good faith and credit of the US. So in plain English, a treasury bond says, please buy me so we can pay for the free stuff we promised our people, but don't worry, we promise to pay you back plus interest by taxing the hell out of our kids. It kind of sucks already. We haven't even got on past the first slide. But that's what a US Treasury bond is. These bonds are then sold on the open market at a bond sale via the big banks, right? So the guys out there saying US Treasury bonds for sale. And then the bonds are purchased by either other countries in the world or by the Federal Reserve, which is a privately held institution here in the US. And they purchase the bonds by writing a check, which is another IOU. And this check draws on an account that doesn't actually exist. The Federal Reserve has no money in the bank. So they write checks. And this check, right, when the bank gets the big checks from the Federal Reserve, they cash the checks into our banking system, and poof, like magic, more currency is added to our currency supply. And seriously, it cracks me up that you can't actually describe our monetary system without using the word poof.
Yeah.
You have to use that to accurately describe our system. Poof.
Right. It's magic.
It's magic, because they write a check from. Don't you wish you could do that, Fabian? Write a check from an account that doesn't exist and poof money into existence.
That would be freaking awesome. Yes, I do wish that.
And then get paid interest on that money that you poofed into existence. I mean,
yeah.
Man.
Yeah, a quick side note that I think our listeners will find really interesting. It is said, and actually a recent Time magazine article talked about this, the Rothschild family are actually responsible for creating this entire bond market the way it works. And so when you talk about the big banks are involved in this, well, they actually created the way this works globally. That's why Time magazine said it's the family that could be worth up to $500 trillion, believe it or not. And you can just Google Rothschild family Time magazine article and it'll come up.
Wow, that's cool. So anyways, the bank then sends that money back to the US Treasury and our national debt goes up, right? Because we owe the Fed that currency back plus interest. Hopefully you see the craziness of that. They wrote a check, poofed currency into existence. We owe it back to them with interest. Crazy. Anyways.
Totally crazy.
The dollar used to be a claim check on gold. It used to be real money. Now the dollars that are being poofed into existence are nothing more than a claim check on an IOU from the Fed. It's nothing but numbers in a system and it has no real value, right? So the US Treasury then takes that money and they send it back to the government, right? To the various branches of government. The government then does what it does best: deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war, right? So what happens then is that the government employees get paid, right? The employees, the contractors, the soldiers, they deposit their pay into the banks. Now, you would think that when you deposited your money into the bank, that what you were doing was depositing it for safekeeping, but you'd be wrong. What you're actually doing is you're loaning it to them, right? And within certain legal limits, they can do pretty much whatever they want with it, which includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out to other people, right? So this is where the currency creation really gets crazy, because this is where fractional reserve lending kicks in. The banks are allowed to reserve only a portion of your deposits, and they can loan out the rest. So reserve amounts vary, but let's use 10% as an example so you can understand how this works. So you deposit $100 in the bank. We have that little $100 there, and under a 10% fractional reserve system, the bank only has to keep 10, right? So why does your bank statement say that you still have $100 in it if the bank stole 90 of your dollars? Well, it's pretty easy, because the bank issues you $90 in bank credits, which are essentially another form of IOUs. I found that fun picture with Obama's face on it and dollars that said IOU instead of printed amounts. But anyway, there's our representation of the IOUs the banks create. So those are called bank credits. And then they lend out or gamble your $90. And because they did that, they create $90 of currency on the spot in the form of these bank credits, right? So now with those $90 the bank stole from you, they are going to take that $90 and loan it out to someone else. Now, these loans are usually for purchases of goods or services like a house or a car or business assets. Let's assume, for sake of example, that they loaned out the $90 for someone to go buy a car, if only cars cost $90. The loanee takes that $90 and spends it at the car dealership. The dealership is then going to deposit that $90 into their bank account, and the process is going to start all over again. So literally, for every $100 of currency deposited in the banks, they are allowed to create 90% to steal 90% of it and turn it into $1,000 of currency. And that's fractional reserve lending. It's sheer craziness. And if it was only that bad, it would be bad enough. But of course, it gets way worse. So we have since our currency supply is expanded exponentially, and our available goods and services upon which to spend that currency does not increase exponentially. It does not increase to the same degree. The only option is for prices to rise in accordance with the expanded currency supply. So this is real inflation. Inflation is currency expansion. That's very important. Inflation is currency expansion. A lot of people say inflation is the increase in prices. Prices increasing is merely a symptom of the problem. The problem is the currency expansion. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense, Fabian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if people thinking, right, inflation is a price increase in goods. Inflation is actually the supply of money, like you basically what you kind of just said, Richard.
Yeah. So inflation is just currency expansion. So if you thought that was bad, we work for that currency, right? We spend our time, our blood, our sweat, our tears, and our talent, right? We are what give the currency its value. Our work is what creates GDP. If it wasn't for us, if it wasn't for the work that we did, there would be no goods and services to be sold. The currency wouldn't have any value. Our work is what creates the value in the currency, right? So we work and we get paid. And unfortunately, we have to save some of that money to pay the tax man, which is the IRS, right? So the IRS turns over our taxes to the Treasury so that they can pay the principal and interest on the loans made from the Federal Reserve. If you remember, the Federal Reserve made those loans out of an account that had nothing in it. They created it, but we still owe it back to them with interest, right? So most of our taxes are not used for roads, schools, and other public services. They are used to pay the interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with an account that had nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud by every definition of the word. And this is one of the things that really blew me away, because for the longest time, I would talk to people about politics. I would talk to people about anything. People always be like, oh, we have to pay taxes for this, that, and the other thing. And what about the roads and the schools? And I'm fine with roads and schools and some of our public services. But when you actually look at our tax system, most of our taxes are going to pay interest on debt that our government is creating for us, and not going to the public services that most people think taxes are paying for. Interesting, before the Federal Reserve, there was no need for a personal income tax. Before the Federal Reserve, there was no income tax in our country. Yet in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, the Constitution was amended to allow for income taxes. Coincidence? Not likely.
Nope.
Right? So, but of course, it still gets worse, which is why this stuff is crazy, right? So remember, there was interest due on the bonds at the Federal Reserve, right? So then there's interest due on all the loans the bank made with the bank credits when they stole your currency to create more currency. That means that there is interest due on every single dollar in existence. There's interest due on it. So if you can imagine it like this, right? If you borrowed the first dollar into existence, but you promised to pay it back plus another dollar in interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that dollar into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there's $2 in existence, but you owe $4. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. The whole system is impossible and it has to fail at some point. It's also why you hear talks about the debt ceiling. Oh man, we're going to hit the debt ceiling. We can't create any more debt. That's not possible. There is no debt ceiling, because if we were to stop borrowing, we would stop creating currency to pay for the interest on our own debt. So we have to continue borrowing and deficit spending for the whole system to work. So even if we paid off all the principal, we would still owe interest, and there would be no more dollars to pay the interest, and the whole system is going to collapse.
Richard, this is another important reason why, we've been hearing now for the last 2-3 years the Federal Reserve coming out and saying they're going to raise interest rates. This is probably the main reason why, if the Fed raises interest rates, that means that the amount of money that that it would cost for us to, not for us, but for government, the U.S. government, to finance the deficit, finance the debt, would be in the trillions of dollars a year. So it would lead to the system collapsing all the much faster.
Yeah. So they can't. If they raise the interest rates, they destroy the economy anyways,
right?
Because the way it works, we've just gotten to a point where we have so much debt, we can't even afford the interest. And when you get to that point, the system can't continue to go on. So, and when we say the dollar has to collapse, it's because the system it's rigged to collapse. There is no other option but for it to collapse. So let's talk about how you and I are being robbed. Currency is being created out of thin air, poof, right? You hopefully remember that. We owe interest on that currency, that created currency, and must pay it with our own income taxes. If you remember, we fought the Revolutionary War over taxes. That's an important point to remember. And now we gladly, not gladly, but we have income tax and it's legal in our country, which is, I think, terrible. But, every dollar of currency created robs value from the existing currency supply. So our dollars become worth less over time. And eventually the system will implode and will lose all the value in your currency, right? So unless you have a hedge against that collapse, which is where real money comes in. Okay, so I told you that stuff was crazy. If you have any doubts about it, please go out and look into how the Federal Reserve says what they're doing. They actually print some of this stuff on their website. It is the God's honest truth about how our monetary system works. So you'll have the opportunity to get on the phone with me and I can share with you the different ways that we're doing things. So I will see you on the next video.